All right, welcome back to another week of the Pod for Change. This week we'll be doing a mailbag day. My partner in crime won't be here, so I will be taking over from here, but just know that you're in good hands. Let's begin. All right, so we tweeted out, what do you want to know about domestication and how it affects climate change? We got a couple questions from a couple readers, a couple listeners. They want to know. They have some hard-hitting questions, and we're going to answer some of them right here. All right. We'll start with the first question. It comes from user Carfork. Carfork writes, "What even is domestication?" That is a good question, Carfork. Honestly, it's pretty simple. Taming wild animals either by generations of breeding or through multiple crop cycles. This can be done to animals, can be done to plants, pretty much anything that is used for human to benefit the human experience. Humans can do this pretty easily through communication as well as being able to tame animals and use them in ways that benefit their life. We use domestication to with our food, our leisure, and sometimes even pleasure. From corn to cotton to cats and dogs, the impact our planet has seen from human domestication is truly global. You see it pretty much everywhere you go. You can't miss something being domesticated. It's pretty much been a part of our culture for as long as we can remember. So that is domestication. We'll move on to the next question. That just gives us a little preface of what's to come. This next question comes from user BPredictable14. He writes, "At what point can domestication become invasive to our local environment?" That's a good question because we're really close to that point. It's become quite the issue recently. That's why we're talking about it today. For the past around, say, 50, a little more than 50 years, it's really come to fruition because we're seeing a major increase in greenhouse gas emissions due to domestication and farming, and we've done very little to change it and to make it less, not less, but more efficient, a more efficient way of living and handling our food supply and enriching not only us but our environment around us. All right, we'll move on to the third question of the mailbag. It comes from Pulsar82. He asks, what are some consequences from farming and domestication? There is a couple. There's also good. As much as there's good, there is always bad. It increases our carbon dioxide levels through farming, travel, everything like that, moving the product. Increase in nitrous oxide levels, increase in methane levels, all greenhouse gases that our environment wants a little bit of, but too much can also be very harmful. From animal agriculture specifically, though, it accounts for 5% of global anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions. Anthropogenic meaning what humans are producing. So out of what the greenhouse gas and carbon dioxide emissions that humans produce, 5% of that comes from animal agriculture specifically. Animal agriculture also represents 44% of anthropogenic methane emissions. So carbon dioxide emissions 5%, methane emissions 44%. The primary driver of climate change related to livestock, as methane is 34 times more potent than carbon dioxide over 100 years. It comprises 44%, it being animal agriculture, comprises 44% of all anthropogenic nitrous oxide emissions, the most potent greenhouse gas. So we talk about how potent methane can be and carbon dioxide and these really bad greenhouse gases where too much of it can be a major issue, and nitrous oxide is the most potent of them all, and it accounts for 44% through animal agriculture. The total agriculture emissions makes up about 75 to 80%. And that is a big, scary number that we definitely need to dwindle down if we want to see real change and hope for a better future. So that is some consequences of domestication. I feel like that there could be more. There's also good things that come with domestication. Obviously, an ease of life makes it easier for everyone else to get their food. Nobody's fighting over food. We know we're going to have decent levels of it at all times. Pretty much able to feed our growing population as we need and as we grow. But yeah, it's really it's hitting us hard at the moment through the pandemic and everything, when everybody goes from going out or buying groceries at stores to now staying at home, ordering delivery services, and not finding their well, not using their money to put it back into services that can help our food and our domestication practices and our farming systems get back on track. It's really hard right now with them throwing away food because restaurants can't pick up the bill because they don't have the customers in their restaurants buying their food. So it's a lot of it's been going to waste, and it's a bad system we found ourselves in, and hopefully we could find a way to get out of it. User Ben Rutgers 76 wants to know what can be done to slow the impact of greenhouse gases due to domestication. That's a good idea. Good question, I should say. There is some ideas to slow the impact, so it's not necessarily something that we have to completely get rid of, but it is something that we should definitely think about dwindling down. There's different things that we could do on a small scale as well as a large scale. We can cut down on animal-based products. That can start from me and you doing this all the way up to the top of the food chain, where big people with big money are able to sort this out and figure out ways that they could cut down on animal meat-based products, things like that. We could stop outsourcing new land for crops and farms. It's tough when you see forests and pieces of land that were once home to large amounts of species and ecosystems turned into farmland, just for the soil to be completely tarnished. It's something that you don't really want to think about, but at the same time, it's happening every day, and people are paying money for it, and in turn, that money is just being burned because those farms and crops are going to waste, or the soil is going bad. We have a lot of good technology that helps our farming industry, but at the same time, getting rid of natural environments is harmful to the rest of the world and the planet itself. Not only that, but turning unused farmland in other areas into sanctuaries for new ecosystems to thrive can also help reduce or slow the impact of greenhouse gases. Taking the land and that isn't being used at the moment could be a great stepping stone to something bigger than just having these massive industrialized farming systems just pumping out emissions through their processing and stuff like that. We can possibly just look into maybe allowing that land to grow and prosper into something else, and allow ecosystems without pesticides, and get our CO2 emission levels and all of our greenhouse gas levels, for that matter, just back to stable, because at the moment it's been pretty crazy with the way that we've been going about our farming and how we're deciding what goes where and how we distribute our food supply. At this time, we're going to cut to a sponsor. I believe this week's sponsor is actually from Team Seas. Team Seas is a growing charity service. I believe it's sponsored by Mr. Beast. He is the creator of Team Seas. He's also done a couple other things. Team Trees is one that he's done. I believe that was a 2020 charity that he first started. But Team Seas, with already over 17 million pounds of trash removed from our oceans, they want to reach its goal. They want to reach their goal of 30 million pounds of trash removed by January 1st of next year, 2022. Every $1 that's donated is one less pound in the ocean. And to donate, just head over to teamseas.org. It's pretty simple. Make a donation and help save our planet. We're going to move on. We're going to move on to our fifth question of the day. User 4007. Oh, very nice. Clever. Are there certain animals or plants that are a leading cause of greenhouse gases? Well, like I said earlier, animals are definitely the leading cause in terms of farming or domestication purposes. But if we want to narrow it down even farther, the three biggest culprits have to be cattle or beef or cows, cattle, corn, or feed processing and production, and enteric fermentation from ruminants, pretty much meaning like manure, the food that the animals eat, the way it's processed, the way animals are processed, the burning of those fossil fuels to make that product at the end of the day. It's quite the burden that our farming industry is putting on our planet. Methane forms about 44% of livestock emissions. The rest is shared between carbon dioxide at 27% and nitrous oxide at 29%. Cattle emit the highest, about 65% of the livestock production emissions are from cattle. With respect to activities, feed processing and production, the eccentric fermentation from ruminants are the two major sources, contributing 45% and 39% of total emissions, respectively. Manure storage and processing forms 10%, and the rest is attributed to transportation and animal processing. On a product basis, milk from cows and beef from cows are responsible for the most emissions, contributing 20% and 41% of the sector's total greenhouse gas outputs, respectively. Storage of manure and supply of feed forms the bulk of emissions in pig production, while supply of feed form the bulk in poultry. Okay, so that article came from The Contribution of Livestock Production to Climate Change, a Review. That scholarly article was referred when I talked about the percentile of livestock emissions in terms of methane, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, and the different types of animals and plants that are leading causes of greenhouse gases. All right, so moving on to question number 6, that comes from user William Tap 5. He asks, with everything else that is harming our planet, why should we focus on the greenhouse gases emitted from the farming industry and domestication of animals? Well, for one thing, it is easy to look past. It's not something that you think about every day. When you think about global warming and climate change, your first ideas go to melting oceans, rising sea levels, rising temperatures. They're not melting oceans, melting ice caps, I guess. But nonetheless, it's pretty easy to look past the farming industry and the pollution that they're giving off. But at the same time, you want to. It's good to look at global warming on a large scale, at a bigger picture. But at the same time, it's much easier to break it off into chunks and battle chunk by chunk. And if you want to gain a perspective on the full picture of global warming, you have to look at all the areas to tackle global warming. And one of the biggest areas has to be domestication, and the fact that we're losing precious land for farming, that land was once inhabited by ecosystem species, animals that are now going extinct, and it's harming our future. Not only with what we're eating, but what we will be eating and what we will see in our future down the line. And sooner than we think, as much as we don't want to worry about it too much, it's something that we definitely know is on the horizon, and it's very scary. It's something that you don't really that you want to keep to yourself, but it's definitely needs to be talked about because it's important. Moving on to question 7, user Jason Biggs asks, what do you think the world might look like in 5 years if our farming industry continues on the path they're currently on? Well, if they're still on the same path that they're on now, the levels of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide will obviously increase. We may find ourselves having to look for other sources of food at that point. Who knows what our crop yields will look like in 5 years based on our soil and our water supply, and how we treat with what pesticides we're using. All of it, they're all factors that are put into play. And at the same time, in 5 years, our technology is going to be different than what it is today. We may have farms that build themselves at that point. We don't know, but the farming industry itself, at this rate, it's not looking good for both the farming industry and our planet. With what's been going on with COVID and everything, it's putting a real burden on them, and it's tough because we can talk all day about how they need to change and how our planet is dying and we may not have a way of fixing it, and we can blame it on them, but at the end of the day, they're also hurting just as much as we are. We're going through a pandemic, and they've been hit just as hard as everyone else in terms of losing sales and means of making money. And so it's easy to judge, but at the same time, they're going through a big turning point in their industry, and it's something that they should be taking into account right now, seeing what's happening and knowing that this is something that extreme events like this are going to become more common the deeper we go into our hole of climate change and just our Anthropocene and what's going on. And we're hoping that the farming industry takes a step in the right direction as soon as possible, because with the way things are going right now, it's not looking good for both our animals and us. We know that less species are on our planet at this point compared to 10 years ago, compared to 15 years ago. Extinction is on the rise, and so are temperatures, and it's really dark, but we as humans have made it through tougher issues, not necessarily tougher, but just issues in general. It's in our human nature to face adversity head on. This mailbag, it was an interesting one because the questions that were asked are questions that you don't really ask every day. When you think about farming, it's not really how is it affecting our environment. It's more like, how are we going to get our food to our table? It puts a little bit of something that you don't take or that you don't see every day. It kind of puts it in perspective a little bit of things that we can change, and hopefully can change quickly. We know what the problem is, and knowing the problem is halfway to solving the problem. From that article as well, they talk about how animals have become less unique. Just species in general have dwindled down to majority of species just being domesticated. I believe about 71% of species at this point are domesticated. It's a number that on the surface people can look at it and be like, oh, there's no issue there, but at the same time it's a major issue, because the more diversity we have in life, the better in terms of gives and takes of our environments. If we have too much give and not enough take, it can lead to bigger issues than the one that we've created in the first place of just greenhouse gases. We know the issue of transportation and gasoline and the movement of food, but it's something that has just been instilled in pretty much our human existence for the past 50 years. At this point, 50 to 100 years, we've been honing our craft in a sense as to what we're doing with domestication and farming. It's almost hit a point where there's no return, but at the same time, it's something that needs to be fixed, or else we're going to see serious, unchangeable consequences. We really have to take into account every aspect of global warming, because our future relies on it. Really, as much as we want to say that it may not happen in our generation, but it will catch up to us. And knowing the effects of carbon dioxide and the shelf life of these toxic greenhouse gases, they will catch up to us eventually, and it's going to come quick and fast, and we may not be ready for it. But at the moment, all we can do is learn from what's happened over the past year and a half, and hopefully implement it into our future, and make sure that we find a way to solve some of these issues that we found ourselves in, not only through just what we've been doing, but this new experience of a pandemic has brought us so many new ideas and reasons to experiment and find different solutions to problems that we've never had before. We know that these extreme circumstances will arise in the future based on what we've been doing now, and it's just a matter of how are we going to handle it, and how are we going to bring ourselves back from where we put ourselves. It really comes down to who we are as humans, I feel like. Well, that is it for this week's podcast. Next week we'll be going over deforestation and how that's affecting climate change. So if you could, that would be great to ask us a couple questions. We're gonna throw an Ask Me Anything, an AMA, on Reddit. Hopefully we'll get some questions back and we'll answer them on the pod next week. All right, guys, take it easy. Have a good one. Bye-bye.